In the arid Texas interior, the suffocating summer lashed the parched land with an unforgiving sun that cracked the soil and stirred up fine dust clouds over the abandoned fields. James Holloway, a solitary 45-year-old farmer, was walking down the dirt road separating his property from the neighboring ranch, when desperate cries shattered the stifled afternoon silence. The sound came from the old, weathered wooden barn, where two male figures moved menacingly. As he neared the dark entrance, James saw Claire, a young blonde in her early 20s, cowering against the ancient plank wall, her face marked by purple bruises and dried blood on her cracked lips. In her trembling arms, she protected a newborn baby, whimpering softly while two brutal men, her own brothers, threatened her with clenched fists and voices laden with hatred, demanding she hand over the child and return home. James didn't hesitate a second before stepping into the barn with firm, determined strides, his imposing presence making the aggressors instinctively recoil. "Get out of here now," he said in a low, controlled voice, his blue eyes fixed on the two men who were still breathing heavily from their recent violence. Without waiting for a response, he approached Claire and gently helped her up, noticing she was trembling not only from fear, but also from postpartum exhaustion. The young mother looked at him with a mix of distrust and relief, her moist green eyes reflecting years of suffering and abuse. During the walk back to his ranch, carrying Claire and the baby in his strong arms, James uttered the only words that would break the tense silence of the afternoon. "You're mine now." It wasn't a declaration of possession, but a solemn promise of protection that would echo across the empty fields like a sacred oath. At James's ranch, surrounded by sprawling pastures and a simple but welcoming wooden house, Claire experienced a strange sensation she struggled to identify for the first time in years. Safety. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of dry hay, and the distant sound of cattle grazing created a comforting rural symphony. Yet, the marks of the past didn't disappear easily. Every unexpected noise made her jump. Every shadow in the window awakened the panic she knew so well. James respected her space, offering basic medical care and a safe room for her and her daughter, but kept his distance, understanding that trust would need to be earned with patience and gentle gestures. Meanwhile, in the nearby town of Cedar Falls, Claire's brothers spread poisonous lies about the solitary farmer, trying to convince the local sheriff that James had kidnapped their sister and that she needed to be rescued from his dangerous clutches. Tension in the small rural community grew like the pressure before a summer storm, with neighbors whispering in the aisles of the local general store and suspicious glances cast every time James appeared in town for supplies. Sheriff Thompson, an experienced man but pressured by the community, made several visits to the ranch to check on Claire's well-being, which she always confirmed was there by her own will, though her voice still trembled when she spoke. The brothers' threats became more direct with each passing day. They would return with more men, armed and determined to take Claire back, no matter the cost. James knew the confrontation was inevitable and began to prepare, cleaning his rifle and checking his ammunition, while Claire watched through the kitchen window at the golden fields, stretching to the horizon, wondering if that temporary peace would soon be shattered by the violence that had always haunted her, like a sinister shadow. On a particularly muggy August afternoon, when the thermometer hit 100 degrees in the shade, and even the birds sought refuge, Claire was preparing a simple dinner of beans, seasoned with bacon, warm cornbread, and roasted meat with herbs from the garden. The comforting smell of home-cooked food filled the rustic kitchen when she noticed a cloud of dust approaching down the road, stirred up by the hooves of 3 horses galloping toward the ranch. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the familiar silhouettes. It was her brothers, accompanied by a third man she didn't know, all armed and with determined expressions that promised nothing good. James, who was mending a nearby fence, saw their approach and ran to the house, grabbing his Winchester rifle and positioning himself on the wooden porch. Claire, trembling violently, hugged her small daughter to her chest and hid behind the kitchen door, listening to the harsh voices approaching like distant thunder, announcing a devastating storm. The confrontation was brief but intense, like lightning cutting through the dark sky. Harsh words were exchanged in the suffocating heat of the afternoon. Threats flew like stray bullets until a warning shot echoed across the silent fields, making the horses whinny nervously. James held his ground firmly on the porch, his rifle pointed at the ground but ready for use, while the three men hesitated between advancing and retreating. Sheriff Thompson, alerted by a neighbor, arrived at the exact moment the tension reached its critical point, arresting Claire's brothers for threats and illegal possession of firearms. As the sun set on the orange and red-tinged horizon, the dust finally settled over the silent ranch. Claire slowly emerged from her hiding place, still holding her daughter, and for the first time looked at James not with fear, but with deep gratitude. That night, as the warm wind blew through the open windows and the smell of fresh coffee filled the house, she knew she had finally found a home where she could breathe freely, far from the shadows of the past that had pursued her for so long. In the weeks following the confrontation, James's ranch gradually transformed into a true home. Claire, who once moved through the house like a silent ghost, began to contribute with small gestures that spoke louder than words. Wildflowers picked from the fields adorned the kitchen table, hand-sewn curtains framed the dusty windows, and the constant aroma of homemade bread filled the rustic rooms. Little Emma, as Claire decided to name her daughter, grew healthy in makeshift cradles with soft blankets, her curious eyes following every movement of the two adults who cared for her with absolute dedication. James discovered unexpected fatherhood, cradling the child on warmer nights while Claire rested, his calloused hands from hard work surprisingly delicate when touching the baby's soft skin. The solitary farmer who once knew only silence and solitude now awoke to the sound of soft laughter coming from the kitchen, where Claire hummed gentle melodies. Life in Small Cedar Falls gradually resumed its normal pace, but the changes were noticeable to those who observed carefully. James, who used to do his weekly grocery shopping in a hurry and with few words, now lingered, choosing fresh fruits and colorful fabrics, always thinking about what might please Claire and make caring for Emma easier. The neighbors, initially distrustful, began to accept the new situation when they saw Claire at Sunday Mass, wearing a simple but clean dress, holding her daughter with maternal pride. Mrs. Martha, the general store owner, was one of the first to offer genuine friendship, bringing baby clothes she had saved from when her own children were small. Sheriff Thompson, satisfied with the peaceful outcome of events, began to greet James with a friendly nod whenever they met on the town's main street, recognizing that he had misjudged the situation from the start. As summer gave way to the golden Texas autumn, Claire began to share painful fragments of her personal history with James. On cooler afternoons, sitting on the porch while Emma slept peacefully in one of their laps, she told of a childhood marked by the early death of her parents and the responsibility of caring for brothers who grew violent and controlling. James listened in respectful silence, his intertwined hands resting on his knees, offering only his constant presence as consolation. He also shared his own wounds. The wife who had died of fever years before, leaving him childless and without hope of starting a family, the isolation he had chosen as protection against further pain. These intimate conversations, interspersed with the natural sounds of the farm, distant lowing, wind in the trees, nocturnal crickets, wove between them an emotional intimacy that transcended any physical attraction, building the solid foundations of a love based on mutual understanding and deep respect. The first winter they spent together brought practical challenges that further strengthened the bonds between James and Claire. December storms left the road impassable for days, completely isolating them from the outside world. But inside the house, warmed by a crackling fireplace, they discovered a domestic harmony neither had experienced before. Claire proved to be a competent manager, organizing supplies and planning meals that stretched provisions during periods of forced isolation. James, in turn, used these days to teach her practical rural life skills: how to milk cows, care for chickens, identify medicinal plants that grew wild around the property. Emma took her first hesitant steps in the living room, leaning on the rustic furniture while the two adults watched her with genuine parental pride. On the longer, colder nights, they sat close to the fire, Claire sewing clothes for her growing daughter, while James read aloud excerpts from the Bible or old newspapers, their voices blending in the cozy atmosphere. With the arrival of spring, James surprised Claire with a proposal he had been considering for months of harmonious cohabitation. On an April morning, as the first wildflowers began to dot the green fields, and the air carried the sweet scent of blooming fruit trees, he knelt before her in the garden where she was planting tomatoes and aromatic herbs. With her hands still covered in dirt, Claire listened to his sincere words. He wanted her to become his wife for real, not just the woman he was protecting, but his chosen companion to face together all the challenges rural life could present. She looked into his blue eyes that she had learned to trust completely, seeing in them not only romantic love, but also the promise of a solid and lasting partnership. Emma, now a curious child of almost 1 year, played among the rows of vegetables, oblivious to the significant moment that would define the future of the small family they had organically built through mutual care, respect, and shared dedication. The simple wedding took place on a sunny May afternoon in the small Methodist church in Cedar Falls, with only a few close neighbors as witnesses, and Emma wearing a little white dress that Mrs. Martha had sewn especially for the occasion. Claire wore the wedding dress that had belonged to James's first wife, lovingly altered to fit her delicate body, carrying with her not the weight of a painful past, but the renewed hope of a future built on solid foundations of true love. Reverend Johnson conducted the ceremony with simple but profound words about commitment, forgiveness, and the human capacity to start anew even after the most difficult experiences. When James said, "I do," and placed a simple gold ring on Claire's finger, he was not just formalizing a legal union, but sealing a pact of mutual protection that had begun in that dusty barn almost a year ago. The modest celebration that followed at the ranch, with fiddle music played by Sheriff Thompson and food prepared by the women of the community, celebrated not only a wedding, but the transformation of 3 lonely people into a family united by chosen love. The first months as official husband and wife brought a peaceful and productive routine to the Holloway Ranch. Claire fully took over the household, transforming it into a truly welcoming home with medicinal herb gardens, colorful flower beds, and a thriving vegetable patch that provided fresh produce for the family table. James expanded his cattle ranching and began selling milk and artisanal cheeses to town merchants, significantly increasing the family income. Emma, now a talkative and curious child, followed the 2 adults around the property like a joyful shadow, learning the names of animals and helping with small, age-appropriate tasks. Evenings were filled with conversations about future plans. James dreamed of building a larger barn and perhaps a small school for the local children, while Claire envisioned a house with more rooms where they could welcome other children she hoped to have. The domestic harmony they had built served as an example for other couples in the community, proving that true love can flourish even in the most improbable circumstances. During their 2nd year of marriage, Claire became pregnant again, bringing renewed joy to the Holloway home. James showed a touching tenderness toward his pregnant wife, taking on heavier household chores and insisting she rest during the hottest Texas summer afternoons. Emma, now 2.5, was eager for her little brother's arrival, helping her mother prepare the old wooden crib James had built with his own hands. The pregnancy proceeded without complications, with Mrs. Martha and other experienced women in the community offering constant advice and support. Claire felt blessed to have a second chance to experience motherhood under completely different conditions, surrounded by love, security, and a supportive community that had accepted her as a valuable member. Afternoons were spent sewing baby clothes, organizing the house, and preparing preserves for winter while James worked in the fields, humming softly, his happiness evident to any casual observer passing by the flourishing property. The birth of Samuel Holloway on a cold December morning marked a moment of intense celebration for the entire family. Claire had a smoother delivery this time, assisted by the town's experienced midwife, with James holding her hand throughout the painful but gratifying process. Emma observed her newborn brother with pure fascination, gently touching his tiny fingers and promising to be the best big sister in the whole world. James held his son in his arms with a mix of joy and renewed responsibility, knowing he now had a complete family to protect and provide for. The house filled with well-meaning visitors, bringing homemade food, baby clothes, and sincere blessings for the couple who had overcome so many obstacles to reach that moment of family fulfillment. During the first weeks after the birth, James completely took over caring for Emma and household chores, allowing Claire to recover properly while dedicating herself to breastfeeding and caring for the newborn who perfectly completed their reconstituted family. As the years passed, the Holloway property became one of the most prosperous and respected ranches in the Cedar Falls region. James had significantly expanded cattle raising, built a small mill to process grains, and established regular trade routes with neighboring towns, always with Claire by his side, making important decisions about investments and future planning. Emma grew into an intelligent and determined girl, helping with Samuel's care and showing an early interest in studies, which led her parents to hire a private tutor who came twice a week to teach reading, writing, and basic math. Samuel developed into a healthy and playful boy, always glued to his father during ranch tasks, and showing a natural aptitude for handling animals. The local community recognized the Holloways as a model family, hard-working, honest, generous with neighbors in need, and always willing to contribute to community improvements like the construction of a new bridge over the creek that cut through the rural region. On a particularly beautiful autumn afternoon, while watching Emma teach Samuel to pick apples in the small orchard she had planted years earlier, Claire reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to that moment of complete peace and deep personal fulfillment. The physical and emotional scars of the abusive past had become only distant memories, replaced by a renewed self-confidence and the unconditional love of her chosen family. James approached from behind, wrapping her in strong, secure arms, whispering words of gratitude for having found her that fateful day in the dusty barn that now seemed to belong to a completely different previous life. They watched their children play among the fruit trees, Emma singing a song she had learned in church, while Samuel tried to imitate the sounds with his still childish speech. The warm wind carried the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of cattle grazing peacefully, creating a natural symphony that celebrated the human capacity for healing, renewal, and the construction of lasting happiness even after the most difficult beginnings. 20 years after that first encounter in the barn, James and Claire Holloway became respected and beloved figures throughout the region, known for their generosity, hard work, and inspiring story of how true love can completely transform the most adverse circumstances into lasting blessings. Emma had become an educated and independent young woman, working as a teacher in the school her parents helped build in town, while Samuel had grown strong and responsible, gradually taking over the management of the family ranch that now included hundreds of cattle and lands stretching for miles. Claire, now with silver hair but eyes still bright with contentment, dedicated her time to helping other women in difficult situations, offering temporary refuge in her home and advice based on her own experience of overcoming and personal rebirth. James, though slower in his movements due to advanced age, still worked daily in the fields, overseeing operations and planning future improvements. Together, they had proven that a single courageous decision, the choice to protect a stranger in danger, can alter the course of multiple lives forever, creating legacies of love that extend far beyond the borders of a rural property in the heart of Texas. On the morning of his 60th birthday, James awoke to the familiar sound of Claire preparing coffee in the kitchen, a ritual that had repeated for over 2 decades without ever losing its comforting charm. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mingled with the scent of sweet bread baking in the oven, creating a domestic atmosphere that still made him smile like in the first days of marriage. Emma had arrived the day before with her husband David and their 2 young children, filling the house with children's laughter and lively conversations about that year's exceptional harvest. Samuel, now a 22-year-old man, had completely taken over the daily management of the ranch, demonstrating a natural competence that made his father proud and calm about the future of the family property. Claire, at 50, maintained her serene beauty and tireless energy, dividing her time between caring for her grandchildren, volunteering at the local church, and coordinating a shelter for women in domestic violence situations that she had founded 3 years earlier. The family gathered around the solid wood table James had built with his own hands, represented the complete materialization of dreams that once seemed impossible. During the birthday celebration, as they savored an elaborate dinner prepared by Claire with Emma's help, James raised his glass of homemade wine and made an emotional toast that summarized all his gratitude for the life he had built. He spoke about that distant day in the dusty barn, when an impulsive decision to protect a stranger turned into the most significant blessing of his entire existence. Samuel listened with renewed attention to the story he had known since childhood, but which gained new nuances with each retelling, especially when Claire added details about her feelings of fear and hope during those first months on the ranch. The grandchildren, 8-year-old Tommy and 5-year-old Lucy, always asked to hear the story of how Grandpa saved Grandma, imagining heroic adventures that surprisingly approached the reality lived by their grandparents decades earlier. David, who had married Emma 5 years prior, constantly expressed his admiration for the strength and determination Claire had shown in completely rebuilding her life after such severe traumas. The conversation flowed naturally between memories of the past and plans for the future, creating a generational continuity that strengthened family ties. The arrival of winter brought an unexpected surprise when Claire discovered she was pregnant at 50, news that initially caused concern due to her advanced age, but quickly turned into cautious joy for the entire family. James proved protective and attentive, as in the first days of marriage, insisting that Claire reduce her activities and accept more domestic help. Emma cancelled her plans to move to a larger city and decided to stay close to assist her mother during pregnancy and after the birth, demonstrating the family solidarity that had always characterized the Holloways. Samuel took on more responsibilities, not only on the ranch but also in coordinating the community activities his parents traditionally led, proving his maturity and commitment to the family legacy. Dr. Morrison, an experienced doctor in Cedar Falls, closely monitored the pregnancy, reassuring the family about the risks and celebrating Claire's robust health despite her age. The women of the community, many of whom had been helped by Claire's shelter, returned the kindness received by organizing baby showers and offering practical support during the months of gestation. The birth of Grace Holloway, in an exceptionally flowery spring, represented a late miracle that renewed James and Claire's energies in ways they never imagined possible at their mature age. The girl was born healthy and strong, with her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin, bringing new vitality to the house that had grown quieter as Emma and Samuel established their own independent lives. James, now a grandfather of 3 children and a father again at 60, discovered reserves of patience and tenderness he thought he had exhausted decades earlier, spending hours cradling Grace on the porch while watching the golden sunset over his prosperous fields. Claire, despite the natural fatigue of late motherhood, radiated a serene happiness that infected everyone around her, often commenting on how Grace represented the definitive confirmation that God still had special plans for her family. The community of Cedar Falls received the news of the birth with genuine celebration, recognizing that the Holloways had become symbols of hope and renewal for the entire rural region. Constant visits from neighbors bringing gifts and offering help created a festive atmosphere that transformed the house into a center of community activity. As Grace grew, becoming a precocious and curious child who followed her parents around the property, asking tireless questions about everything she observed, James began documenting the family history in a detailed diary he intended to leave as a legacy for future generations. He wrote about the lessons learned during decades of hard work, about the importance of compassion in times of crisis, and about how a single courageous decision can alter the destiny of multiple people forever. Claire contributed her own memories, especially about the experience of overcoming trauma and building a new identity based on self-love and renewed trust. Together, they planned to transform part of their property into an educational center where young couples could learn sustainable farming techniques and receive guidance on healthy relationships, perpetuating the values that had guided their lives. Emma and Samuel enthusiastically supported this project, offering their professional skills to develop effective educational programs. Grace, even at 5, already showed interest in the farm animals and garden plants, suggesting that the next generation would remain connected to the land that had provided sustenance and meaning for their family during so many productive and gratifying years. At 70, James looked back with no regrets, only deep gratitude for a life that had exceeded all his most optimistic expectations. Claire, at 60, maintained her characteristic energy, divided between caring for Grace, now a determined 15-year-old teenager, and expanding her social projects that had helped hundreds of women in the region. Emma had become director of the regional school, applying the values of education and compassion she had learned at home, while Samuel had transformed the family ranch into a model agricultural operation that served as an example for other Texas producers. The older grandchildren, Tommy and Lucy, attended the state university but returned regularly to help with farm activities and participate in the family traditions that had been established over the years. The Holloway property had become an informal pilgrimage destination for troubled couples who came seeking advice and inspiration in the love story that had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. James often received visitors on the porch where it all began decades earlier, sharing accumulated wisdom and reinforcing his conviction that true love, based on mutual respect and constant dedication, remains the most powerful force to transform lives and entire communities, creating legacies that transcend generations and continue inspiring others long after the original protagonists have left this world for the next.